Northview Baptist Church, as we gather together for our Sunday school hour, let's take our hymnals, 205 in your hymnals. There's within my heart a melody, Jesus whispers sweet and low. 205 in your hymnals, let's sing it out together on that first verse. There's within my heart a melody, Jesus whispers sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee, peace be still, in all of life's ebbs and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. All my life was wrecked by sin and strife, discord filled my heart with pain. Jesus swept across the broken stream, stirred the stumbling chords again. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. As the piano plays, let's turn to greet one another this morning. As we find our seats again, let's take a look at 205. Soon he's coming back to welcome me, far beyond the starry sky. 205. Let's sing it out together on that last verse. Soon he's coming back to welcome me, far beyond the starry sky. I shall make my flight to worlds unknown. I shall reign with him on high. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you this morning. Welcome to Northview Baptist Church and our Sunday school hour, and thank you to those who are joining us via technology as well. As we go to the Lord in prayer, ask you keep Brother Wayne Turnmeyer in your prayers. There's some good recent encouraging news with him, and pray that that continues. And Brother Charles Taylor is still not well. Continue to pray for him also. And let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask him to bless us this morning. Father, I come to you today and I thank you for your goodness to us. Thank you for the opportunity to be in church. Thank you for the missions conference that we just had, Lord, and the blessing that we received there. Pray for those men as they return to their ministries, that you would lead and guide and provide for their needs. and help us to be faithful to give. And Lord, I do lift up Brother Wayne Turnmeyer, to be with him, be with his family, be with the doctors as they treat him. And pray for Brother Taylor that you strengthen him, help the medications that he's taking to be effective, and get him back on his feet quickly. And Father, bless our time together around your word today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you may be seated. If you did not receive a handout, if you'd slip up your hand and Brother Baker will make sure you get one. We're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 18 to begin with this morning. 2 Samuel chapter 18. And just to quickly recap, David had been on the run because of Absalom's rebellion, and he had given a command that Absalom was to be treated gently for his sake. And of course, when Joab and his men found Absalom, they did not do that. Well, some of the men obeyed David, but Joab and his 10 armor bearers did not. And so they killed Absalom, and that's where we left off. Absalom hanging helplessly by his hair in the boughs of an oak, and Joab thrust him through with 3 darts in the heart, and then they threw him in a pit and covered him with stones. And an inglorious ending for a prince. I want you to notice in 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 18, now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. Now, it seems to me, if I recall correctly, that during the tribulation, isn't there an image that's made and it's given life? But I told you that Absalom in some ways is a type of the Antichrist, and this is another instance where I see that. Verse 19, then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, let me now run and bear the king tidings, how that the Lord hath avenged him of his enemies. And Joab said unto him, thou shalt not bear tidings this day, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. But this day thou shalt bear no tidings, because the king's son is dead. Then said Joab to Cushai, go tell the king what thou hast seen. And Cushai bowed himself unto Joab and ran. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, yet again to Joab, but howsoever, let me, I pray thee, also run after Cushai. And Joab said, wherefore wilt thou run, my son, seeing that thou hast no tidings ready? But howsoever, said he, let me run. And he said unto him, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and overran Cushai. Number 4 is David's crying, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But I think it's interesting here that Ahimaaz, he doesn't know what's happened. He's seen that there's a great tumult. He's seen that there's something going on, and he said, let me run, go tell David. And Joab says, well, you don't know what's happened. You don't know what to tell him. He said, but I want to run anyway. All right. So Ahimaaz and I don't have a lot in common as far as running goes. I never have enjoyed running. Playing basketball in high school, we had to run, and I did it because I had to, didn't do it because I enjoyed it. I could run playing basketball because there's action, there's a goal. Just to run, I never could get into that. And it's just, I don't know, maybe there's too much time for my mind to wander or something. I don't know, but that's another reason I didn't get into soccer. There's a lot of running and nothing ever happens. You can run for 90 minutes and the score be 0-0. And I just don't see the point in that. At least in basketball, you can, there's a little bit of scoring that goes on typically. But anyway, these guys, Cushai and Ahimaaz, they're running. And I heard someone say one time, some people have something to say, and some people just have to say something. And Ahimaaz is like the latter. he just wants to say something, but he doesn't have anything to say. Now Cushai knows what's going on, so Joab sends him to be a messenger to David. Now notice verse 24. And David sat between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate into the wall, and lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running alone. And the watchman cried and told the king, and the king said, If he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth. And he came apace and drew near. And the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called unto the porter and said, Behold, another man running alone. And the king said, He also bringeth tidings. And the watchman said, Methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz the son of Zadok. And the king said, He is a good man, and cometh with good tidings. So Ahimaaz was evidently a very fast runner. He overtook Cushai, and he got to the king first. Verse 28, and Ahimaaz called and said unto the king, All is well. And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king, and said, Blessed be the Lord thy God, which hath delivered up the men that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, Is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, When Joab sent the king's servant and me thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. And the king said unto him, Turn aside and stand here. And he turned aside and stood still. Think about this. Here is a young man. He's eager to tell something, but he doesn't have all the information. And you see this in people, but you see it in children a lot. They want to say something, but they don't really have all the information that they need to complete the conversation. And Ahimaaz, he didn't help the king. He didn't give him good information. Well, I know something was going on. Joab, there was a tumult around Joab, and something was going on, but I don't really know what it was. It's like, thanks for that, Ahimaaz. I appreciate that. Now I know not anything more than I knew beforehand. I think about, and this isn't exactly this, but I think this is an encouragement to us. First of all, one of our purposes as messengers of the king is to give the gospel. And if we're going to do that, we need to be prepared to do that. And what I mean by that is you need to be knowledgeable of some verses that you can give to other people that show them the way of salvation. Even giving your own personal testimony can be a way that you can lead someone to the Lord and just tell them what you did. But being prepared to give the gospel, and I know that's not the emphasis of this, but I think it's a good time to bring out that point. Now Cushai comes in verse 31, and behold, Cushai came, and Cushai said, Tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. And the king said unto Cushai, Is the young man Absalom safe? Now, he asked the exact same question to Ahimaaz. Is the young man Absalom safe? That's all David was concerned about. He wasn't concerned about his kingdom. He was concerned about Absalom. Is Absalom safe? And Cushai answered, the enemies of my lord the king and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt be as that young man is. And the king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. Now that's David's crying. David was, he was heartbroken over Absalom. And Absalom is a rebellious son. If you remember, he lied, and we're going to address that here in a few minutes. We're going to look at some of the Psalms that David wrote during this time of his life. Absalom lied to David before he actually started that coup. He said, well, I got to go to Hebron and pay a vow that I vowed to the Lord and sacrifice. But he didn't do that. He lied to him. And he stabbed David in the back. He stole one of his counselors and Ahithophel. And yet David, and as parents, we can understand David's love for his child. But at the same time, when you look at it in the context of David's position, and we're going to address that here in just a minute, but he was inconsolable. And I mean, he went up to his chamber and wept. Now, at this time, David is not in Jerusalem. He's in Mahanaim. So, I mean, he's not in Jerusalem. And it says the gate, and he went up to his chamber. He's got a place, kind of a safe hold there, stronghold. But after this death of Absalom, the fourfold punishment of David was complete. That fourfold punishment that Nathan prophesied concerning his sin with Bathsheba, that completed that fourfold punishment. Now, Roman numeral 28 on your outline is forlorn sovereign. Forlorn sovereign. In chapter 19 through chapter 20, verse 2, we see David and the effect that his sadness and his just the depths that he went to for mourning for Absalom. But before we get into that, David wrote as many as 15 psalms concerning this time in Absalom's life. We're going to look at them in numerical order. It's not necessarily the order they were written, and you'll kind of get the picture of that as we go through. We're going to start in Psalm 3. And so if you want to turn over there, we're not going to read every single one of these because there are 15 of them. But I'll give you the numbers. It's Psalms 3, 4, 5. Psalms 3, 4, 5, 25, 27, 28, 29, 40, 41, 55, 61, 62, 63, 143, and 144. So 3, 4, 5, 25, 27, 28, 29, 40, 41, 55, 61, 62, 63, 143, and 144. Now, as I said, we can't spend time on every one of these 15 Psalms. It would take a long time. But we're going to go into a couple of them, and I am going to give you a brief mention of each one. But I want you to get the picture of what's going on at this time. So when David learns of Absalom's rebellion, he, under the cover of darkness, he takes his family and his closest followers and heads east out of Jerusalem, crossing the brook Kidron, crossing the river Jordan, and then he turns north and goes toward Mahanaim. And they pushed on through the dark and into the next day. Finally, they stopped to rest. And David hasn't had sleep in 2 days. He's very weary. So he goes to sleep. He awakes refreshed the next morning, and he writes Psalm 3. Psalm 3 says, Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Selah. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of mine head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Selah. I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. Selah. Psalm 3, if you picture it being written as David wakes up that morning and he looks around at who's with him. He's got Joab, Abishai, Benaiah, Ittai, and all of his mighty men minus Uriah. And it's a psalm of confidence. Psalm 4 is an evening psalm. And it's believed that after that day, so Psalm 3 he wrote in the morning, after that day they realize, they understand Absalom is not pursuing them immediately. So that evening he writes Psalm 4. Psalm 4 acknowledges God's goodness and provision. And if you notice, verse 5 of Psalm 3, I laid me down and slept, I awaked. So it's a morning psalm. Psalm 4, an evening psalm, stand in awe and sin not, commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still, verse 4. Verse 8, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. And then the next morning, after a good night's sleep, he gets up and he writes Psalm 5. And Psalm 5 we're going to go into a little bit more in depth, but it could be titled, Good Morning, Lord. And in verses 1 through 7, he asked the Lord to listen. It says, give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my meditation. Hearken unto the voice of my cry, my King and my God, for unto thee will I pray. My voice shalt thou hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee, and will look up. For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing. The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man. But as for me, I will come into thy house in the multitude of thy mercy, and in thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. In verses 8 and 9, he asked the Lord to lead. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness, because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face. For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue. In verses 10 through 12, he asked the Lord to legislate. Destroy thou them, O God, let them fall by their own counsels. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against thee. But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy, because thou defendest them. Let them also that love thy name be joyful in thee. For thou, Lord, wilt bless the righteous. With favor wilt thou compass him as with a shield. Now, the next one's Psalm 25. I'm going to turn over there real quick. Again, we're not going to read the whole psalm. But Psalm 25, its basic theme is guidance. Look at verse 4. Show me thy ways, O Lord. Verse 5. Lead me in thy truth. Verse 9. The meek will he guide in judgment. So the basic tenet of Psalm 25 is guidance. In Psalm 27, we see in verses 1 through 6, David's dealing with the highlands of faith. But then in verses 7 through 14, he's in the lowlands of fear. Verses 1 through 7, part of this psalm is a song that has been put to music. And of course, all these are songs that maybe the Jews sang at one point or another. But for us, verse 1 there, and the couple of the following verses have been put to music. But verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. And through verse 6, again, the highlands of faith. But then in verse 7, there's kind of a change. And verse 12, deliver me not over into the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me. I had fainted, verse 13. So there's a little bit of fear involved. Psalm 28 could be titled, The Lord is my rock. And David's asking for retribution for the wicked in Psalm 28. Psalm 29 is a sequel to Psalm 28. And in Psalm 28, David expressed fear that he might perish by the hands of his enemies. But in 29, you see a different attitude. He expresses his faith in God. There are 11 verses here, and we're going to read these because I want you to notice how many times, whether he uses the title or the name of God or a pronoun that refers to God in this psalm in 11 verses. Psalm 29, give unto the Lord, O ye mighty, give unto the Lord glory and strength. There's 2 times in verse 1. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. There's 3 in verse 2. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaketh the cedars. Yea, the Lord breaketh the cedars of Lebanon. He maketh them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young unicorn. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shaketh the wilderness. The Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord maketh the hinds to calve, and discovereth the forest, and in his temple doth everyone speak of his glory. The Lord sitteth upon the flood, yea, the Lord sitteth king forever. The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. 25 times David uses either the Lord's name or pronoun in reference to the Lord's name in 11 verses. And so it's obvious David is speaking directly to the Lord there. And then you skip forward to Psalm 40, his next psalm that he wrote during this time. And again, not necessarily in that order, but in numerical order. This is the next one. In the first 10 verses, you see David's past triumphs. Verse 1, I waited patiently for the Lord. Verse 2, he brought me up also out of a miry pit. He hath put a new song in my mouth. Blessed is the man that maketh the Lord his trust. Sacrifice and offering thou dost not desire. Mine ears hast thou opened. But then there's a change in verse 11. And you see, goes from his past triumphs to his present troubles. Withhold not thou thy tender mercies from me, O Lord. Let thy loving kindness and thy truth continually preserve me. For innumerable evils have compassed me about. Be pleased, O Lord, verse 13, to deliver me. Verse 14, let them be ashamed and confounded. Verse 17, but I am poor and needy. And then Psalm 41 is divided into 3 sections, 3 parts. Verses 1 through 3, we see David's fears. Verses 4 through 9, you see David's foes. And if you notice verse 9, yea, mine own familiar friend in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. That potentially is talking about Ahithophel there, or perhaps even Absalom himself. But and then in verses 10 through 12, you see David's faith. Now, Psalm 55 is a special psalm that David wrote specifically dealing with the defection of Ahithophel. And we're going to look more closely at this one. This one could be titled, When Sorrows Like Sea Billows Roll. And, we've all been where David is here. This situation that he's in with Absalom is partly of his own creation because of his lack of dealing with Absalom and the things associated with him. But it spiraled out of control, and he can't do anything about it. The only thing he can do is fall into the grace of God and God's arms. So in verses 1 through 8, you notice his anguish. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. And I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. Then, in verses 9 through 15, you see David's anger. In verses 9 through 11, he's angered at the trouble of his country. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. And then in verses 12 through 15, his anger shifts to the treachery of his comrades. So he's dealing now specifically with Ahithophel. For it was not an enemy that reproached me, then I could have borne it. You think about that with respect to America. You can understand an enemy attacking our country or not liking us. But it's really difficult to deal with when the attacks come from within. And David's saying here with Ahithophel, if it was an enemy that did this, I could deal with that. But it says, neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me, then I would have hid myself from him. But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide and mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God in company. Think about the hurt that David's feeling. They went to church together. They talked together. They counseled together. They ate together. And it was just extremely hurtful to David. Then in verses 16 through 23, you see David's answer. And I'm not going to take the time to read all of that, but verse 16 said, as for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. And then notice verses 22 and 23. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. Verse 22, that's been a verse that's been used for comfort for ages. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. When you're dealing with troubles, if you have someone that's close to you that hurts you in some way, the best thing to do is cast that burden on the Lord. Leave it with him. Let him sustain you. Psalm 61 is the next psalm in order. And David wrote that perhaps after the death of Absalom, but yet while he was still at Mahanaim with Barzillai. And it could be titled Mixed Feelings. He's struggling with his feelings for Absalom, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, but yet he also has feelings of relief that this trial appears to be over. Psalm 62 is thought to have been written shortly after he learned of Absalom's rebellion, and it caused him to immediately turn to God, and you can see that. And again, we're not going to read all of that, but look at verses 1 and 2. Truly my soul waiteth upon God, from him cometh my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. Psalm 63 could be titled knocked down but not knocked out. You know, David's on the run. He's been betrayed by Ahithophel, by his son, and by his nephew. But you know, it's going to take more than that to defeat David. He had his mighty men with him. He had the Lord. And the thing about this psalm is, as you read it, you get the idea that the thing that David missed the most about Jerusalem, it wasn't his house, it wasn't his wives or anything like that. It was the house of God. He missed being able to go to the house of God. Look at Psalm 63. O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips, when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth hard after thee. Thy right hand upholdeth me. But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword, they shall be a portion for foxes. But the king shall rejoice in God. Everyone that sweareth by him shall glory. But the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. In that, in verses 1 through 3, you see how David longed for God. Verses 4 through 8, how he lived for God. And verses 9 through 11, how he looked for God. And then the last two, Psalm 143 and 144. Psalm 143 could be titled Depression. He's struggling with depression because of the betrayal of his son. And you can see his grief. Verse 4, therefore is my spirit overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is desolate. He's depressed. But 144 is a sequel to 143. And it's a victorious psalm after returning to the throne after the defeat of Absalom. So these 15 psalms, they give us a picture, kind of a window into the heart of David and what he's going through and what he's dealing with. And again, I didn't read all of them. I do have the outlines for all of them if you're interested. But I would encourage you at some point to go through those and with the idea of what David's going through and think about that as you read them. But we get the idea. David is heartbroken over the death of Absalom, and it affects his kingdom in a negative way. What's left of it. So back to 2 Samuel chapter 19. And letter A is rebuke. Rebuke. David's reaction to the death of Absalom confused the people of Israel because he acted as if they lost and they were defeated because he cried, he was inconsolable, he wouldn't come down. Matter of fact, if you read this account, you can see what it did to the people. Verse 1, and it was told Joab, behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people, for the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. Now look at verse 3. And the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. I mean, think about that for just a minute. Here, it should be a day of victory because the king's going to have his kingdom restored. But because of David's reaction, the people are confused and they're scared. They don't know, should we rejoice? But the king's not rejoicing, so they're sneaking around the city. It says they gat them by stealth that day into the city. It's kind of like when, the kids, when mom or dad is upset about something, may not have anything to do with them, but they kind of sneak around and try to avoid mom and dad's presence because they don't want any of that to be taken out on them. That's kind of how they were. Verse 4, but the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. Well, the rebuke comes from Joab. Joab came to see David. In verse 5, he said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and of thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemies and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. And Joab, again, the relationship between David and Joab was an interesting one. Joab had a way of speaking to David and addressing David more bluntly than probably anybody else could. And I mean, he just told him like it was. He said, it appears to me that if everybody else here had died and Absalom had lived, you would be happy with that. And that's not the way it should be. He said, if you keep going like this, look at verse 7. Now therefore arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto thy servants. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now. He said, if you don't go out and make this thing right, you're going to lose your kingdom. And not from Absalom, but because your reaction to this thing. So he advised David to go sit in the gate. And again, he's at Mahanaim still. He's not in Jerusalem. And to speak to the people and thank them. And that's what David did. Verse 8, the king arose and sat in the gate. And they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for Israel had fled every man to his tent. And all the people were, we'll hold on there. And this went a long way to healing that rift that had been caused in the kingdom by Absalom's rebellion, his sitting in the gate and greeting all the people. Now, look at verses 9 and 10. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king saved us out of the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled out of the land for Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why speak ye not a word of bringing the king back? Now, where this is going, letter B is return. Where this is going, all of Israel except for Judah is wanting to reinstall David as king. But the interesting thing about that is Judah is his family. Judah is his tribe. And Absalom and Amasa were also of the tribe of Judah. And Absalom had evidently done a really good job of stealing the hearts of the people of Judah because they weren't ready to bring David back yet. Verse 11, and King David sent to Zadok to Abiathar the priest, saying, speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, why are ye the last to bring the king back to his house, seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house? You know, and it reminds me of when Jesus was on the earth, and he said, a prophet hath not honor in his own country. Jesus came, the first time he came, his own people rejected him. And it makes me think of that. But notice what David says in verse 12, ye are my brethren, ye are my bones and my flesh, wherefore then are you the last to bring back the king? And say ye to Amasa, art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. Now remember, this is the second time that David's done that he's moved Joab out of that position, the captain of the host, and put somebody else in. And both times it was after the kingdom was united into one kingdom again. Judah, they accepted, verse 14, you see this, they bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, and they brought him back as king. When he put Amasa as captain of the host. Now Amasa was Absalom's captain. And David installed him as captain of his host, even though he was involved in that rebellion. And Joab doesn't respond well to those things. You remember what happened the first time? He met Abner outside the gate of Hebron and killed him. Well, Amasa should be watching his back, because historically when Joab's demoted, the person that takes his place has a short shelf life. And that's exactly what happened. But in verse 14, Judah responded by welcoming back the king. In verse 15, he returned. The king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go meet the king and to conduct the king over Jordan. Now, we're going to stop there for today. It's 10:30, and I'm not going to be able to finish this up. But so Absalom has died. David is back now in Jerusalem. But it's not smooth sailing. He's still got some issues to deal with, and we'll talk about those as we go forward and talk about some more interaction with those sons of Zeruiah, as David often called them. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Again, I have some those outlines if you're interested, the ones that David wrote during his run from Absalom. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for your word. I pray that you would help us as we go forward, be with the service to follow, be with Pastor as he preaches. Lord, I do thank you for the missions conference that we had this week and the good messages and the relationships established with these missionaries, and I pray that you would lead and guide them. Be with our ministry here. Lord, I thank you for the progress next door. I pray that you continue to help that to proceed quickly and on time. And Lord, help us to use that facility for your honor and your glory. And bless us throughout this week. In Jesus' name, amen.